Playing the waiver wire is important in fantasy leagues and can make or break seasons. For this waiver wire entry, we will take a look at Arizona Cardinals wide receiver Rondale Moore's fantasy profile and determine whether or not he's a player you should be picking up off the waiver wire. We'll start with the positives with Rondale Moore's fantasy profile. Fantastic yards after the catch. Rondale Moore was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in the yards after the catch department during the 2021 season, averaging 8.1 yards after the catch per reception, the third best among wide receivers, and the 16th best in the NFL among all positions. Being one of the best players in the league in this area as a rookie makes it easier to see how Moore could be fantasy relevant in 2022. The next thing I really like about Rondale Moore's fantasy profile is that he plays in Cliff Kingsbury's wide receiver friendly offense. Cliff Kingsbury has been one of the more wide receiver friendly coaches in the league over the course of his career, which is good news if you plan on rostering Rondale Moore or one of the other Cardinals wide receivers. The last major thing I really like about Rondale Moore's fantasy profile is the fact that it's his sophomore season. Rookie pass catchers generally have a harder time being successful at the NFL level, with only 27 rookies in NFL history finishing with over 1,000 receiving yards in their rookie year according to StatMuse. So expectations for Rondale Moore last year were much lower. According to an article by Pro Football Focus, wide receiver breakout performances are more abundant from a percentage and raw numbers standpoint in years 2 and 3. So now that Moore's in his second season, he should be better adjusted to the level of play expected at the NFL level and be more prepared to contribute during the 2022 season. Moving on to some of the concerns with Rondale Moore's fantasy profile. Lingering hamstring injury. Rondale Moore has missed the first few games of the year with a hamstring injury. This kind of injury tends to linger throughout the year, and you have to wonder even when he does return if he'll be able to stay healthy the rest of the year. The next major concern I have with this profile is his competition for targets. The Arizona Cardinals have quite a few reliable pass catchers right now in Marquise Brown, Zach Ertz, AJ Green, and Greg Dortch. And superstar wideout DeAndre Hopkins will be back soon too. Because of this, there's a very good chance that Rondale Moore is not high enough on the target totem pole to be fantasy relevant in 2022. The last major concern I have with Rondale Moore's fantasy profile is his smaller stature. Rondale Moore stands at 5'7" and weighs 181 pounds. He's also got shorter arms and needs throws put on top of him. Not many wide receivers have been successful at this size in NFL history, which is a little concerning for his fantasy potential. Some additional thoughts on Rondale Moore's fantasy profile. In 2021, Rondale Moore finished as the WR85 in Standard, with 55.1 total fantasy points and 3.9 fantasy points per game. The WR71 in half PPR formats, with 82.1 total fantasy points and 5.9 fantasy points per game, and the WR65 in full PPR formats, with 109.1 total fantasy points and 7.8 fantasy points per game according to Fantasy Pros. In half PPR formats, he had 8 out of 14 games with 0 to 4.9 fantasy points, 3 out of 14 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 2 out of 14 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 0 out of 14 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, and 1 out of 14 games with over 20 fantasy points according to Fantasy Data. In his college career, during his freshman season back in 2018, Rondale Moore had 114 receptions, 1,258 receiving yards, 12 receiving touchdowns, 21 carries, 213 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns in just 13 games. Kyler Murray. During the 2021 season, Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray completed 333 passes on 481 passing attempts for 3,787 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, and 10 interceptions in 14 games. Personal opinion. While the hamstring injury is a major concern and could easily linger the rest of the season, Rondale Moore is still a player I think that is worth picking up before his first game back, or a guy worth stashing on the injured reserve if you play on a league site where that's possible, like ESPN, because he has the talent and the Cardinals' offense is above average. If he doesn't show anything in that first game or two, you can easily just drop him and go back to playing the waiver wire again, but there's enough upside to take the chance on him.
And that's it for today's waiver entry. If you have a player that you'd like to see covered, drop a comment below.